2000. Ooh, I'm representing Eyeseeme. Let's do it. Aha. Eyeseeme, 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 Eyeseeme.
Hello and good evening. This is Jeffrey Blair from the Eyeseeme Bookstore. Welcome to Eyeseeme Spotlight, where we spotlight the latest and greatest in the children's book industry and speak to some of the great creative authors who've put together these masterpieces. Jeffrey Blair from the Eyeseeme Bookstore. Welcome to Eyeseeme Spotlight, where we spotlight the latest and greatest in the children's book industry. I'm getting feedback from, hold on one second. Authors who've put. All right. I was getting feedback from my Facebook feed. Okay. All right. Can you guys hear me okay? You guys are good? Okay. All right. Good. So I'm flying solo today. I usually have an engineer on, my daughter, but she's not feeling too well. So shout out to my daughter, Naomi Blair, who hopefully she's listening as well. Get better, but I'll try to do both things at the same time. All right. So welcome everybody again to Eyeseeme. As you guys come into the webinar, just go ahead and announce yourself in the chat. Feel free to say who you are and where you're calling in from. Also, spread the word. We're live on Facebook, as you heard, as well. So if you're on Facebook, share it. We're going to have our author in a few minutes actually start to read a little bit from a book. So this will be for all ages. And the children, I think, will learn something very fascinating about our history and about family. So I think it's a real important day today. So again, just announce yourself in the chat and where you're from. If you're representing an organization from a school or from a nonprofit, then also announce as well. I see Helen Frost is on saying hello, calling in from Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Hi,
yeah, absolutely. Bobby Brown, I hear you, I see you. I see a couple other people coming in. Tisha Taylor, Avery McNeil. Hey, Avery, how you doing? Okay, good. All right, so as you guys are coming in, again, a few housekeeping. We're gonna, talk a little bit, but we want your questions. We want to have your questions or comments. So please add them in the Q&A section. And when we get to that part of the discussion, we'll have our special guest or any of us answer any of your questions. Also, please, like I said, spread the word. And we really appreciate the support. So again, this is Eyeseeme Bookstore, and my wife and I started this bookstore out of the frustration that we had as African-American parents trying to find books that reflected our children's beauty of their skin and their hair, the beauty of their legacy of the people and the contributions that we've made. Really hard, but we knew it was very vital in their education. So long story short, we spoke to some parents and other parents and teachers as well who had a similar thing. And so we decided that we would do something about it. And we started the Eyeseeme African American Children's Bookstore to be that resource for parents, teachers, and ultimately for children, so that all children can see themselves in the books that they read. And so we started the Spotlight series again, so we could highlight and bring to you the latest and greatest books that are out there today. And today we're going to be talking about Papa's Free Day Party. This just got released yesterday, so it's hot off the press. Just released yesterday, and we're so honored because we have the author here with us, and we're going to talk to her in a few minutes. But first, I wanted to also introduce, I have Eyeseeme Bookstore. We partner with a lot of organizations, a lot of nonprofits, a lot of schools, and one that we've done a lot of work with lately over the past couple of years is Remember the 400. You can find out about them, rememberthe400.com. But I have Anthony Ross, who is the director in the St. Louis chapter, Remember the 400. Hey, Anthony.
Hey, Jeffrey, how you doing?
I'm good. So I'm glad that you're able to come in and participate in this discussion. As we talk more, you'll see why it's really telling that that we had Anthony here representing Remember the 400. Tell the people in the audience about Remember the 400.
So, well, thank you, first off, for inviting me on. So Remember the 400 is a youth organization that's dedicated to telling the history, to telling Black history, going all the way back from 1619 all the way up to today. So we want to present our history in its entirety, right? We a lot of our history is spotty. We hear about things here or hear about things there, but it's never really told in its entirety. So Remember the 400 is dedicated to teaching that history and kind of clearing up those inconsistencies when it comes to our history. So also I wanted to put out that Remember the 400 was created by Shadrach Porter, a brilliant man.
Nice. Yeah, we've done phenomenal work with them. They've done a lot of accomplishments here in the St. Louis area. And I know you guys have chapters all over as well. But here in St. Louis, we definitely have, I've seen the impact you guys have done. And so one of the things why I kind of wanted you on this call too with me is because of your focus on history. And I think one thing that you noted, it's important that we are telling our history to our children. And we don't outsource that. And so it's important that we do that, and that we represent that even to people who are not African American, and so it's important that all children get the correct story about America and the world and our contributions to it. So thank you for being here. And we can kind of get started, and let me actually introduce our guest. Our guest is Miss Marilyn Nelson. Hello, Miss Nelson.
Hello, Jeffrey. I'm pleased to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you took time to be here at Eyeseeme. Congratulations on your new book that just came out. And let me just read a little bit bio that I have here, and then I can sort of hand it over to you, and so we can find out more about the book and yourself as well. So Miss Marilyn Nelson is the author or translator of more than 20 books and chapter books for adults and children. Her critically acclaimed books for young readers include A Wreath for Emmett Till, Fortune's Bones, Carver, A Life in Poems, a Newbery Honor Book, and recipient of the Boston Globe Horn Book and the Fiora Stegzel Strauss Awards. Her memoir, How I Discovered Poetry, is a Coretta Scott King Honor Book, and was named one of NPR's best books of 2014. A 3-time finalist for the National Book Award. Her many honors include the Frost Medal, the NSK New Start Award, and the Ruth Lilly Poetry Prize. She was the Poet Laureate of Connecticut from 2001 to 2006. Ms. Marilyn Nelson, thank you again for being here. Wow, quite an accomplishment, quite accomplishments. Wow, so glad to be here with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm the one who's glad to be here with you. Thank you so much for the invitation. I have to say, Matt, I've thought about this a lot. I don't think I ever saw a children's book with, as we say, people who look like me, ever in my childhood.
Wow.
So I'm really glad to be a part of a very important movement, a crucial movement, I think.
Absolutely.
So I have this book, and I'm really happy that it's out now, my new book baby. And I'm very grateful to Just Us Books for bringing it out for me, for being the midwives of this baby. This is a book that's been in process in my mind for many years, probably 50 years. I've been wanting to write that. I'm an unfortunate hint about my age, but I've been wanting to write this book since I was a child. It's made up of pieces of my maternal grandfather's story, and I never had the whole story in mind, but I had pieces of it because my mother would occasionally say, oh, that reminds me of my father's something, and she'd tell a little anecdote, and I would record that in my mind. But I never had the whole story from beginning to end. I always had little pieces. So this is a story that's made up of those pieces, and a few little things that had to be left out, and a few even smaller things that I made up. But it's mostly things I remember being told by my mother. And so it's My mother is one of the main characters in the story. It's about this family in their house in the 1920s. And the daughter named Johnnie is my mother. And she asks her papa how old he is. And he says he's not sure. And she doesn't understand how it can be possible that he doesn't know how old he is and doesn't know his birthday. So I thought I would read a couple of pages from this book. And Jeffrey, the page I want to read from is the one with a double page spread of the house on fire and the night rider on a horse.
Okay, I'm gonna show this.
Oh, I forgot to say that the illustrations are made by Wayne Anthony Still, who has done a fantastic job on this. And let me just read his bio.
Yes.
Wayne Anthony Still is an award-winning illustrator, painter, designer, and sculptor. He holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in illustration and graphic design from the University of the Arts in Philadelphia. And he makes his home in Pennsylvania near the city of Philadelphia, where another famous member of his family, William Still, was an active leader and historian conductor of the Underground Railroad. Wow. So Wayne Anthony Still has a family with history, with a history. So I read this.
That detail is beautiful.
It's a really beautiful illustration, I think. Okay, so this is Papa's story. His father ran away from slavery to do something with the Union during the Civil War. Not quite sure what, but he worked with the Union, and he came back and had some money and bought some land and married and started a family and started farming. And now I'm picking up where this story goes here. One night when I was 5 or 6, horses galloped up to our house, and men wearing white hoods and carrying torches and rifles set fire to our home. I heard Pa scream. Ma screamed, "Run, John, run, go north, boy, run, run." It was dark. I was shaking with fear, but I ran. I slowed down just long enough to look up and find the North Star, and that's the direction I headed. Sometimes I stopped to drink from a creek. I stopped to sleep when it was daylight. But as soon as it got dark, I looked at the sky and started running again. So that's the beginning of his story. I'm going to read the next page. So if we can turn the page. Okay. Some days and nights later, I was eating a carrot in a garden when a big white hand landed on my shoulder. I was so tired and hungry and scared that I fell down in a faint. The man picked me up and carried me into his house. So that's the beginning of the story. And now I love this illustration. Mm-hmm. I love the face of the boy in this picture. Mm-hmm. So now I just talk about the story a little bit. The story begins, you remember, he's 5 or 6 years old when the home place is set on fire by night riders. If you are a child listening in, you may not know that the night riders were the forerunners of the Ku Klux Klan. They started in the years of Reconstruction after the Civil War. as a way of as a reaction to the power that African Americans were starting to claim during the Reconstruction. So that's a part of the story that I inherited. That was the germ, the seed of my grandfather's story. And the second page that I read to you about his being found by this white man is both true and not entirely true. I had remembered I thought my mother told me that he was in a garden. I don't know why I remember the detail. He was in a garden eating a carrot when this man came out and grabbed him and took him into the house. But after I wrote the story, I decided to try to find the family of this man. And this part of the story, the first part was, I think, in Tennessee. This part is in Missouri. So it's actually a Missouri story. And I contacted the Missouri State Historical Society and told them the name of the family and that I was looking for them. And they found an old obituary of someone with this last name, with the names of this person's children and the towns they live in. So I wrote to the people in these towns in Missouri and immediately got a couple of letters back. And one of them had a copy of a letter that my uncle, my mother's brother, sent to the family about 45 years ago, describing his father's story and how the connection happened between our family and this family. And my grandfather's version of the story is that he wandered northward for several days alone, 5 or 6 years old, and he got to the Mississippi River and was standing on the banks of the river crying. And this white man asked where his parents were, and he told them about the fire and that they told him to go north and that he didn't know what to do. And this man said, "I have a boy your age. Why don't you come home with me?" And this man took my grandfather, little boy, grandpa, home with him. And they just made room for him in their home and raised him and educated him and raised him with their son. And when he was a young man, they owned a ferry going back and forth across the Mississippi, and he worked on the ferry, running the ferry back and forth. And one day some strangers out of town, rednecks, harassed him and he threw them overboard. And then he went home to this family. Their last name is Bryant. He went home to the Bryants and told them what had happened, and they agreed that he needed to get out of town right away. And they put him on a train going west with some of their farm animals, and with enough money that it was like an inheritance, enough money to buy land. And he wound up going to Oklahoma, and there I'll pick up the story again. He wound up going to Oklahoma, and Jeffrey, I'm on the page where he's in Boley, Oklahoma, and there are lots of people on the street.
This one?
Yes. Okay, so he wound up in Boley, Oklahoma, which was one of several all-Black towns in Oklahoma. Boley was founded It was first started being settled in 1903, and it was incorporated in 1905. So it was about 10 years old when my grandfather arrived there, and now I'll pick up his story. My train went west toward the new state of Oklahoma. There was a town in Oklahoma called Boley that I had heard things about that I could hardly believe. I had heard that Boley was a town of people who looked like me, people who were born in bondage, or like I was, born to people who had been freed. In Boley, they owned all the farms and businesses in and around town. When I got to Boley, I spent an hour walking up and down Pecan Street, just looking at the men and women of this miraculous free Black town. Within a few days, I bought a piece of land to farm. I built a house. Then, for the first time in my life, I plowed my own land, grew my own crops, and slept under my own roof at night. I milked my cows every morning. The rest of the story is in the family home on their farm outside of Boley. And they're scrambling, the family's scrambling to figure out how to make a celebration of Papa's birthday and how to celebrate his birthday, what day to celebrate and how to celebrate his birthday. And I don't want to give all of the story away.
No spoilers, no spoilers.
I don't want to. But last night, we had a book launch party, and I realized beforehand that I've only written this one story about my grandfather's childhood, but I've written some poems about their lives in Boley. So I read a couple of poems that are not in this book to give a sense of what Boley, Oklahoma was like in the 20s. Absolutely. And I maybe have time to read two poems.
Oh, please. I was going to say, please bless us with that. I would love that. Absolutely.
This is from a book called The Homeplace, my book of poems called The Homeplace, which is about my family history, my mother and grandmother, their family histories. They were from Kentucky. And this is a poem about how my grandmother Ray married John Mitchell and left her hometown in Kentucky and went out west to the wilderness, really, it was the West. They were sod busters. They were the sod busters were the first ones who broke the ground and plowed it and planted things. So these were Black sod busters. So this is a poem about my grandmother going out and living there. It's called High and Haughty. And one other thing I have to say about my grandmother is that she was extremely proud of being Black. Everybody in her family, there were a lot of sisters in the family, everybody in the family played the piano by ear. They just could sit down and play.
Wow.
My grandmother would not play on the white keys.
What?
Played everything on the black. She was too proud to touch the white keys. My mother said, who was also a pianist and also could play like that, but she was also trained. She said she played in this really unusual key that's very hard to play in, but that's what she was like. Okay, that's why this is called High and Haughty. Ray, almost a spinster, gave up her dreams of princes to marry a widowed farmer she'd refused as a proud, lanky girl. He was intelligent, kind, and who would be good enough? On her husband's farm near Boley, Oklahoma, she was surprised by love like a rainbow umbrella unfolding over their heads. New people arrived every week, having heard of an all-Black town from an incredulous mouth or a Negro newspaper, having heard of her husband. See that big tree? If you talk to the man that lives there, he'll loan you enough to get by, maybe lend you a mule. They weren't rich, but John would give away the drawers on his behind if Ray didn't stop him. John, think of the children. She loved John, not because he'd made her his wife and the mother of two when she was well past 30. She loved John because early one July evening, after stopping his car in the road, wading through a peanut field, taking off his hat and handkerchiefing his forehead, a white man called toward the house, "Mr. Mitchell?" And Ray became, at long last, a queen.
Wow.
So yeah, thanks. I think that Mr. Mitchell is really important. Boley was famous for many things. And one of the sources of its fame is that during the 20s, sort of Bonnie and Clyde like gang of gangsters was riding around the West and the lower Midwest robbing banks. They were called the Pretty Boy Floyd gang.
Oh, yeah, heard of that.
They robbed a lot of banks. Right, okay. They tried to rob the Farmers and Merchants Bank in Boley, Oklahoma. But the Farmers and Merchants Bank was a Black-owned, Black-operated, Black-insured bank in an all-Black town. And this white gang rode in and tried to rob this bank, and the bank shot back. I believe they killed a couple of the members of the Pretty Boy Floyd gang. There was an article about this all the way east in the New York Times. Black town resists bank robbers. So this is another similar story about Boley. It's called Armed Men. And again, my grandmother is the star of the story. Ray teaches at the Boley Baptist School, a little too far away to travel safely there and back by buggy every day. Some years, she lets the children stay on the farm with their doting father. But this year, they're towing the line at school, although keeping them here is a bother. She has to watch them all the time. Boley's a Negro town, and sometimes carloads of white men drive through looking around. Today, for instance, as she'd held silk yard goods to her cheek and smiled at the extravagance, she'd heard the screen door creak and a young, fair-haired white man had stalked in. His dismissing eyes had registered Mr. Oliver's store, first contemptuous, then surprised. Mr. Oliver said, "Good morning, sir. One moment, please. Miss Ray, you look Easter fine this morning. Can I cut that silk today?" The white man spat a bad name. Mr. Oliver prepared to fight. The white man promised to bring some friends and shoot up the town tonight. And now Ray's children expect her to let them go out and run through the twilit streets of Boley, where each window holds a loaded gun. So that's Boley. Wade Hudson suggested last night that this is a story that begins in trauma but ends in triumph. And I think maybe a lot of African-American stories are that way. Anthony, that's what you said earlier. We need to remember not only the trauma, but also the triumph.
Yes, yes.
100%. 100%.
Excuse me.
Well, one of the things that I was so excited looking forward to this discussion is because Eyeseeme and Member 400 had a trip this past weekend. If you guys can see my t-shirt, we went down to Tulsa, Oklahoma this past weekend to talk with some of the people there, visit the sites. That's the site of Black Wall Street. Now it's a famous term, but that's only recently. People didn't know. I remember my first time, it was about maybe 30 years ago. I went into a black bookstore. Who knew later on I'd end up owning a black bookstore? I went into a black bookstore. I saw that term, Black Wall Street, which caught my attention. But I was like, this is a novel, right? This couldn't have really happened because I've never heard of it before. And by I'm a man by then, and I've never heard of it. But now it's coming out more. But this year is the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa massacre, where they destroyed Black Wall Street. So they're going to have a lot of different events taking place. And so we wanted to go down and sort of see for ourselves. We took some children with us as well, talk to some people there, and just sort of see what was there and make some connections. So it was really good. So that's so when we were there is when I first learned it wasn't just Tulsa. Tulsa, Black Wall Street, probably the most famous now, but I think Oklahoma had the most all black towns of all the states.
50
of 50 all black towns.
50.
And so we were like, oh wow, that's amazing. And so now having this discussion with you to find out about this all black town in Oklahoma, I'm like, this was like meant to be, right? This timing was just perfect. Right. And to me, thank you so much for reading those pieces of the book. And please, everybody, this is like required reading. This should be in everybody's house. Because like you said, that story of going from trauma to triumph, and it's a part of that is us telling the story, and so yes, this is the 100th anniversary of the destruction of Black Wall Street, and we need to discuss that. But you also got to discuss, well, what made Black Wall Street Black Wall Street? Like there's a success story there of how Black people were just creative, resilient, and smart, and just being able to really work together to build something really great. That story it doesn't get told. So I'm so glad you're telling the story, and I'm just looking forward to hear more about that, because I think it's something that we need to remind ourselves about.
Yes, I agree 100%. That was actually one of the biggest takeaway from the trip was that wow, there were so many more Black Wall Streets. Some before Greenwood, I was learned right as Boley. Years before, I think like 2 or 3 years before Greenwood took off, Boley existed. And to learn that they was one of the most technical, advanced Black cities in the country was just like, oh my gosh. And being a part of that, to go and see that, just like Jeffrey was saying, it's one of those things where now the narrative is different now. Because now the first thing I had to ask myself was, so, what happened after 1921 to Boley? And they continue to thrive. The city continued to thrive. And it's just, as you said, it shows their resiliency, right? That we started with nothing. We weren't given land to go and create these cities. we went and put together the resources to make it happen, just to live our lives and create, like we were speaking about earlier, right? Out of, I forget the saying, Jeffrey, you have to help me out. Desperation breeds inspiration.
Oh yeah. Yes, that's it. That's it. Yeah.
And to read about how these cities were created is just astounding, right? This was not too long after uh, the Civil War, Reconstruction, and we all know what happened during Reconstruction. That the turn of the century, that these towns start popping up, all black towns. Like I have to keep saying it over and over and over again in my head. These were all black towns that were thriving. And as we said during that trip, we learned so much. But one of the sayings is one I'll never forget, right? The Black Wall Street mindset. It's not so much about Black Wall Street itself, it's having that mindset, that community-driven mindset. And it was just like an aha moment, like, oh wow, that's something I never would have, something you never really think about. You hear the term Black Wall Street, first thing you think about is money, you think about the businesses, you think about all these other things. But for the residents there, their biggest takeaway was we were a community. Everything was built and created to help each other. It wasn't about let's make money today. It was literally built to say, what can we do to sustain each other that we won't have to rely on anybody else? And so your book definitely helps, oh my goodness, awaken so much to learn more about those towns, and to hear about the story of your great grandfather, right? Or is it great great grandfather?
Mine? Oh, it's my grandfather.
Your grandfather, I'm sorry.
Grandfather, yes.
To hear that story is, it's phenomenal. I can't imagine, right? You're uprooted. You have to leave your parents to go to someone else. And again, I won't give the spoilers away in the book, but to do all that, to come out ahead and to remember that story, in order to pass it down so that you can create these memories, is nothing short of phenomenal. And I personally just want to say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I love the part when you read where it's just where he goes to town, to the Boley, and I can imagine, right, how amazed he was to see everything look like me, like everybody here looks like me. And I heard, let's see, where they owned all the farms and businesses in around the town. He said they spent about an hour walking up and down and just seeing all the people, and just can imagine what that feeling is like, just to be able to see that and to have that experience, I mean, even today, that would make me just bubble. Like as you read it, I start to feel pride,
Yes.
a little bit, and just to see that. And this story is just, these stories need to be told, and need to know about that. It really has a total different mindset. I remember when I was, we do a lot of book fairs before the pandemic. We go into the schools, set up the books, and so on and so forth. I remember one time I was setting up books that we have, and a couple of children, it's like middle school, let's say, walked by. And as soon as he saw books, that they saw that all the books had covers that looked like them, African-American, they didn't really read anything, just look into glaze. They said, oh, civil rights. And then they kept going, right? Like that's the only dimension that, sometimes we think about ourselves. And that's important, all those things we need to know our history, good and bad, but we never ever get, again, just how much we're capable of. And I think sometimes that the younger generation doesn't get to see that, understand that. So they may not always be able to understand their full potential, So I think it's just important what you're doing. One of the questions that came through actually was, what about Boley today? Are you familiar with Boley?
Yes, I could talk a little bit about it. But I saw that question, and before I answer it, let me just drop one more thing into the discussion.
Sure.
I don't want to leave Tulsa yet.
Okay.
There's a new book published maybe a couple of months ago by Koresh Lansana about Tulsa. Do you know this?
We got a few books that came in. I gotta.
Okay, I have a copy. I don't know the title of it. Its last name is Lansana, and I want to recommend it to everybody. It's about Black Wall Street. It's a description of a day in the life of a little girl who lives in the Greenwood community. It's just a day in her life, riding a bicycle, going to pick up something at the grocery store. But it happens the day before the Tulsa massacre.
Oh, wow.
So it's just a beautiful, innocent life. But then you know at the end of it what's going to happen. It's really, I think, a good book for children to see how fragile peace is. Now, what Boley is like today, I visited Boley, I think 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, with some members of my family. We went to Tulsa and walked around in the Black Wall Street area, and then we drove down to Boley to go to the Boley Rodeo, which I want to talk about also. And I don't know, Boley changed. It's still there. I had a Zoom conversation a few days ago with the current mayor of Boley and the Boley town historian, both of them very knowledgeable. Like most small farm towns, Boley went through a decline, probably in the 30s, but it's still there, and it needs investment and it needs businesses. This is what the mayor said. What they need is for people to come in with some business mind and revive the town. But it is still there. It's still alive. It's smaller than it was at one point. It was a big town, and it was a major stop on the railroad. I don't know if it's as important as a railroad stop as it was. The main thing I know about it is that it has held a rodeo every year for the last maybe 120 years. Last year was the first time they didn't have the rodeo. It's an all Black rodeo. There are several other Black rodeos, but I think, as in most other things, Boley's the largest one. Usually Boley's the largest and oldest and most successful, and the one that's been kept alive for the longest. And it is an absolutely tremendous experience to go to a Black rodeo, because everybody in the rodeo is African American, and most of the people in the audience are African Americans. And that means you're seeing, I wrote some poems about it, the young women who are riding in the barrel races, which is an event only for women. They're all riding as fast as they can, and they all have dreadlocks. When we saw them, dreadlocks were all flying behind them. It was, and to see a bull rider, it's just so wonderful, and it seems to me to be something that Black children need to see and need to imagine. Rodeo cowboys, for the people who are the clowns, to run out and save people if they get bucked off. The clowns come out and protect them. They're Black clowns. It was just a wonderful experience, and for me it was the highlight of going to Boley, because I don't know where my family's farm was, so we couldn't actually go back to the literal place. I'm sorry, I'm tearing up now with
Oh,
nostalgia.
it's beautiful. That's fine. It's a
Yeah.
beautiful story. Anthony, you were gonna.
No, just again, I'm just sitting here in awe. Just the stories I can only imagine. I can only imagine just from our trip of what we experienced. I can imagine having a part of that history, a part of my family, if that makes sense, right? To be a direct descendant of that, to know that that form was there at one point in time, to know your connection to Boley is just, oh man, I can
Yeah.
again, I can't really put it into words. It's just other than we must make sure we tell our story.
Yes, and you know, one of the other aspects for my family, you know, Oklahoma has just been recently declared as Indian country now. I can't remember what it's called. And in Boley, there was a Creek Seminole College where my grandmother also taught for a while. And because of the closeness of those two groups in Boley and maybe in Oklahoma in general, I only know this one little spot. We grew up, we were raised with so much respect for Native American lives. And that seems, and it seemed important to me when I was a child. And it seems important to me even now that we recognize the way our lives are braided together through history. And often we forget about that. I've just been doing some research about the history of slavery in New England.
Mm.
In the 18th century, Native Americans in New England could not be enslaved for life. So only Africans were enslaved for life. But in the wars between the settlers and the natives, if natives were captured, they were often sent to the West Indies to be sold as slaves. And I've been wondering since learning this, whether anybody studied what happened to them. What happened to them if you were a Narragansett or a Pequot and you were sold as a slave in Bermuda or Jamaica? Then what? Did you just disappear? So our histories are entwined. I just always feel that I need to make a point of that.
Yeah. Again, just in Tulsa, that's one thing that was stressed too. Like we would talk to someone, they would say, "Oh, well, this is actually Cherokee land," and then they would give us little like interaction between whites, African Americans, and Cherokee, like how you know, especially in Oklahoma. So yeah, and it's funny. The more we learn about that, I think that helps us look at each other in a different way, maybe. You know what I mean? Not so much the other, but there's so much. I mean,
that connection. When we analyze that history, O.W. Gurley, the one who bought the 40 acres of land for Greenwood, actually purchased it from Native Americans.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about Black Wall Street, you know, like you said, that connection, how it's intertwined, that's the start of Black Wall Street was purchased from Native Americans. So a rightful purchase, right? It wasn't taken. It was just a rightful
purchase.
Yeah. Oh, one of the questions in the chat says, please write a children's story about the rodeo. Yeah.
I've written a sequence of poems, which maybe some publisher might be interested in publishing as a children's book with illustrations.
One person said, Black people started the rodeo. We shouldn't have to say Black rodeo.
Oh, yeah. Oh, good. That's right. Most of the cowboys were
right.
Yeah.
Like us, yes.
The original cowboy.
That's right. That's right. So in reading the book, this is a question from someone, what do you hope readers take away from reading the book?
Well, it's a sweet family story. It's a story of a family that's together and loving. It's a family that hasn't been broken apart by trauma. And very often when we look at African American family stories, we're looking at families that have been wounded somehow. This family is whole. And so that's part of it. And then there is the history. There is the history of people who ran away from slavery because they knew what was going on. They knew that there was a war happening and they wanted to risk their lives for the right cause, for us.
Yes.
And so that's a part of it too. And then the part about the night riders is a necessary part of US history to learn. And then the other two parts, which I feel strongly about both of them. One of them is the fact that this child was taken in.
Yes.
Just taken in by somebody who, like that girl in Minneapolis with a cell phone, who turned on the video and took that video and changed history.
Yes.
One action. This man met a child and said, "Come home with me." We don't know whether he and his wife fought over this. We don't know whether they were ostracized by the community because they had taken in this Black child and were treating him like a child. I don't know about this family, but this was an act of benevolence, of goodness. And I want to give that man and his wife and their child, their son who grew up with this Black almost brother, I want to give them credit for that.
Yeah.
And then I mean, they made it possible for him to land in Boley and make a life there. And then I want to also, there are a lot of pieces of this story.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the Boley part is, I think, the triumph that I just keep thinking that this is a man who, my grandfather, a man who had one foot in each of two worlds. My uncle told me toward the end of his life that in Boley, whenever it was necessary to negotiate with a white businessman, or there was something that needed a spokesman for the town to deal with the outsiders, the whites outside, they asked my grandfather to do it because my uncle said, well, Papa was raised by white people. He knew how to talk to white people. He was the one who was the spokesperson, who could talk to people and negotiate and stuff like that. And so he was a kind of what's the word when you can speak two languages? To
bilingual.
Well, let's call it bilingual. Yeah, that's not what I was looking for, but that's good enough. Yes, and that gave him some extra ability to be useful, to be helpful, and I don't know what else to say. And then there's the history of Boley. One of the nice things about this book is the last page, which Just Us Books decided to give some little historical document at the end of the book. So they created this kind of newspaper that has it tells about the history of Boley. There's a picture of my grandfather. There's a picture of my mother and her brother. There's a picture of the boy who grew up with my grandfather. There's a picture of the Farmers and Merchants Bank on Main Street in Boley, and there's a poster of the Boley Rodeo. So that puts the whole story in a wider historical perspective. And I think that part of it is valuable too, that this is real history.
Nice.
The children's story, but it's a story that's rooted in real history. So
Awesome.
Beautiful. And, it's great because so many times people come into the store and they say, and it's not African Americans who say, I want to talk to my children or find books for my children about, African Americans, or talk about slavery. How do I do that? And, they go Martin Luther King and things like that. And that's fine. That's fine. But this checks all the boxes of what you just mentioned. There's so many themes that come out of this as far as family and resilience and history and all those various things that are, universal. Like you can identify with those things. And there really are lessons here to have with your children, in so many ways. So yeah, I think that's really beautiful, really beautiful.
Yeah, one of my biggest takeaways was this book is the resiliency. Is that your grandfather told his own story. He did not let his circumstances determine his life.
One of the questions could you speak about your current connection to the Bryant family? And the end matter of the book. You already did that. Okay, yes. Mm-hmm.
But I would like to say something about it because it's so surprising when I found the Bryants, and they immediately said they knew the story. They had the letter from my uncle, and they felt, as I do, that it was a missing part of the family that had suddenly appeared, and like now the family is whole because there was that piece that had been missing. And I haven't met them in person, but we've Zoomed, and it feels like there is a part of the family that's been recovered.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think one of the questions, so often when stories are written, they start off with questions that need to be answered, and it brings a sense of closure. Have your questions been answered?
That's a really good question. And I guess they have been answered. I would like to go back to Boley and be able to find my grandfather's grave. I would like to be able to find the place that used to belong to them, but those things are minor.
Right.
Being able to tell his story and to share it is probably enough. I think my mother was passionate about family history and African American history, and I think she would be really happy with this book. And it's something she would have wanted me to do, and I'm glad I finally have done it.
Gotcha. What are you working on now? What's next for you?
I have some books that are on the runway ready to take off. I have another book that was published recently that I'm proud of, that's about a little girl who is an introvert and an artist who she draws on the back of protest posters and then something happens where the protest posters have to be used again. So they're in a march with these posters that have a 6-year-old child's drawings on them. The art is beautiful. And right now I'm working on a sequence of poems about people who were enslaved in one small town in Connecticut. So it's about Connecticut slavery, and I'm working with several people on that, and we're being guided by a professional historian who, if we ask questions, she's willing to do research about them. I asked her last week. I did writing about this woman who was in a household where she had 4 children, and the people that were living in the same house with the master's family, they had like 5 children too. And I wanted to say that she had to wash, and she had to launder diapers for 5 babies.
Wow.
And the historian said, I don't think they would have said diapers in the 18th century.
Right.
So we had to talk about, so what would you call a diaper in 1740? And she researched it, and just, really, we found a word. So, yeah.
Are you going to share the word with us?
Yes, I think the word, I can't right now remember. I think it's Barbies, or
Okay.
I can't remember what it was.
Yeah.
But, people didn't change babies' diapers every day in the 18th century. A baby could be wearing the same Barbie or what it was for like 3 days.
Whoa. Wow.
Yeah, let that sink in.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's different. So let's see. I'm just looking to see if other questions. Someone says, how does one get in touch with Miss Nelson? I guess your website, right?
Yeah, I do have a website. It's not updated, but there's an email address on it. And my email address is fieldsofpraise@hotmail.com.
Oh, also someone had asked, could you tell again what that, does that seem right? fieldsofpraise@hotmail.com.
Oh.
Yeah. The book that you recommended on Black Wall Street, the author.
The author is Quresh Ali Lansana. And Quresh starts with a Q. And the last name is Lansana. And I'm sorry I can't remember the title of the book, but it's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll send it out.
So just listening to your story, very fascinating again, but it sounds like you grew up in a household that often shared stories of Black history.
Yes, as I said, my mother was absolutely passionate about Black history, and her family was very interested in preserving their family history. So there were several people over generations who tried to write down the family story. And then my mother was just, I said, just before she died, my father was a Tuskegee Airman, and she was a teacher. And just before she died, she said, I just knew we were going to live some history. She knew we were living history. And when you know that you're living history, you make history. You take responsibility for the future. And I think that's how we were raised, to realize that we had to do things that made our ancestors proud.
Yeah. Yes. Wow. Well said. Well said. Well, you definitely made them proud with this. And I want to make sure that everyone really get a copy, spread the word about this book. As someone just said, I just learned so much of our history in mere minutes. In just a few minutes we've been talking, they said they've learned so much, and it's so true, and it's enlightening and it's enriching. And so you definitely need to get a copy of this, hot off the press, just published yesterday with Just Us Books. And shout out to Just Us for bringing us these great titles. And schools, classrooms, any place, daycare, any place there's children, Black children, all children, doesn't matter. This is a universal story that you really will enjoy. You really need to have it. Great discussions can come out of this with you and your children. Great discussions come out of this. So I really highly, highly recommend it. Get a copy of it. Thank you so much, Ms. Nelson, for blessing us with this title. And thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, again. I'm sorry?
I just said thank you, and thanks to everyone who attended. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, Eyeseeme Spotlight Series. We bring the latest and greatest books to your attention. Also, just note, this weekend is going to be one of our first author events taking place in store. We haven't had one since the pandemic started. And so this one is going to be actually with Miss Kristen Mosley and her first book that she just put out. She's going to be doing a book signing here at Eyeseeme Bookstore on Saturday. Check out our website, check out social media. We're going to be posting the details on there. And we also will broadcast it as well. So stay connected with us. Thanks again. Eyeseeme Spotlight Series. Thank you, Anthony. Remember the 400. Keep doing what you're doing. Shout out to Shadrach Porter. Have a good evening.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
All right.
2000. Woo, I'm representing Eyeseeme. Let's do it. Aha. I see me. 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 Hope bunch of them see themselves in his